Eric, thank you for the quick introduction there. I know you're going to move up here to another slide and then I will kick us off. But we are very excited to have everybody here today. Thank you for taking some time to learn more about ZorForum. I'll quickly take you through the agenda. I'm going to start us off here for a couple minutes, giving an overview of what we're going to go through, who you're going to hear from, and why all of you, too, should be excited about ZorForum. We're very thankful and proud and excited to have Allan Young joining us today, who a number of years ago started the very first ZorForum group of emerging franchisors with one of our co-founders, Dave Pazgan, who is also on the line. And they're going to have a large fireside chat telling you the story, the background, the whole spirit behind ZorForum, and why, giving a good insight into why Stan and I were so excited to hook up with Dave and bring ZorForum to the masses. Eric, our CMO here on the line with us, who is driving this whole program, so God help him. Thank you. Has developed an awesome manifesto video for everybody here to give you an understanding of, again, sort of the spirit, the purpose, the underpinning, and sort of our overall mission for franchising, and why all of you, I think, would be very interested in being part of our community as either a member or a franchisee, a moderator of these groups. Then we'll spend a little bit of time telling you, if you are interested, what is required or what the next steps are to getting involved. And then again, very excited to have John Francis, Johnny Franchise, Jerry Henley, and Eric himself, all of whom have already joined the ZorForum community as franchisees and moderators and are running groups as we speak to create value and provide value to all of our members. So EJ, thank you for driving the ship here. You can move to the next slide. Unfortunately, we couldn't find a better picture of me, so that's what we're going to start with. But I do want to start by saying what I always say, which is, what's good, franchise fam? We are thrilled to have you, excited to have you. Hope that we see a lot of you out in San Diego here soon. And thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules, especially as we're getting prepared here for that big annual convention next week, to hear our story, hear our background, and hear what Allan and Dave have to say about how we got started, and then hear from everyone else here who's sort of driving the ship and trying to get more emerging franchisors and franchise leaders involved in this great community. So to kick us off, I just wanted to go back to, speaking of the annual convention, my first IFA show, even on the supplier side. When you first get into franchising, however you're getting into franchising, it's a crazy world to try to figure out how to navigate. I remember being at the MGM Grand back when the IFA convention was there and not at Mandalay Bay, surrounded by thousands of people. We had a booth, we had some sort of a game plan going in, but we really had no idea who to connect with, where to sort of get started as far as charting our path towards our success, at 919 Marketing in franchising. And it took us many years to sort of build up sort of credibility and equity and an understanding of franchising itself to really sort of take off. And their emerging franchisors often don't have that time. You don't have the time, the money, the resources, the bandwidth for it to take 5, 7, 10 years of spending a ton of time and money out at a bunch of different conferences and just hoping that you run into the right people who can point you on the right path. So when Dave talked to me initially about ZorForum and this community that he's trying to build, I was immediately excited because I remember my own history, and I remember working with so many emerging franchisors over, my almost 15 years in franchising. And all too often, they're just struggling to figure out where to take a first step, much less the next step. And with, the leaders we have involved in this call that you will hear from, I really do believe that this is a community that's right on time, that's desperately needed for emerging franchisors who need to sort of shortcut that pathway to getting in touch with the right people, resources, knowledge, and guidance, quite frankly, to make sure they spend their time and their money wisely, that they build sustainable concepts and sustainable business models, surround themselves by great people who can help their franchise development growth, help their franchisees succeed, provide that requisite support, and put them on the pathway to success in franchising. And as we get started here, as I turn it over to Stan to guide our fireside chat here, our mantra here that you'll hear a lot is that, we Zor together and we soar together. So thank you all for taking the first step to learning how you can be involved in our community, joining this group of Zors, because that's really true. When we all Zor together, when we work together, we will soar together and make franchising a better place to be and a wonderful place for emerging franchisors to come in and achieve their success. So thank you for joining, and Stan, take it away.
Where do I sign? You got me all fired up. Thank you, Graham. Everybody, I want to thank you all for joining us today. And my goal today is the moderator of this terrific fireside chat that you're going to be participating in as a listener, is to help you learn what got Graham so fired up, what got me so fired up. 18 months ago, I do a podcast. Many of you know I do a podcast weekly called Franchise Today, and I had as my guest Allan Young, who was talking to me about being the CEO and founder of Shelf Genie, and that was the topic. Well, the conversation turned out to be entirely different. I think the lion's share of that interview was Allan selflessly talking about something that was a part of his success in life as the founder and CEO of Shelf Genie. It didn't have a name yet. It wasn't really called ZorForum, but it was a collective of emerging franchisors that, under the leadership of Allan's past background in peer groups outside of franchising, these group of guys, 7 or 8 of them, got together every, 6, 8, 9, 10 to 9 times a year, as I'm told, sometimes at broker events, at IFA events. They would run into each other at industry events, and they were all emerging Zors. They gravitated toward each other collegially. I guess they were not directly competitive in any way, shape, or form, so they felt some comfort in becoming collegial and maybe flying in a half day early and having some best practice idea exchanges and talking through things that were going on in their businesses. But Allan, with that YPO background, with that peer group background, started to suggest to these guys, we've kind of run out of best practices to talk about. So why don't we go deep, and why don't we all sign some confidentiality with each other, and let's have some real discussions about what gets us up at 3 a.m. and prevents us from falling back asleep. And Allan and Dave were part of this initial group, and I'll leave it for Allan or Dave during the chat to identify the others that were part of the group. But they found something magical was happening. And out of all of that, some, including Allan, have taken tremendous exits from their businesses. And I've heard it said that some of these guys attribute what they did for each other and with each other as much to their success and their exits, or maybe their infusion of private equity capital, to the direction and the path that their businesses have taken. They've attributed that as much to each other and to the group that they were part of as anything else they could think of to give credit to. That's pretty powerful stuff to me. And here I am hosting my podcast with my guest, Allan Young, and I think we're going to talk about Shelf Genie. And I talked about, as I do every week on my podcast, I open every week the same way. I express to my audience that unless your last name is Titus or Bergeron or somebody who's a second generation member of a franchise family, we don't find franchising as much as franchising finds us. And I ask my guests each week to tell that story and to share with the audience how that started for them and when that was, and we walk it up from there to the current day. Well, here I had Allan as my guest, and I'm expecting that's what we're going to do. And Allan is telling me all about this group that Dave and he and others are part of, and I'm jumping out of my chair. I'm thinking, holy God, I'm a supplier in IFA these days, and we suppliers are sometimes 20 deep in a category. And here I'm hearing a description of something that I'm just, to me, it was a blinding flash of the obvious, but I'm banging my head thinking, how is it possible that this isn't already out there? And I went crazy with what I was hearing. And I hope you'll feel the same way as I did when you hear from Allan and Dave today, bringing us up to date on this concept that they conceived And that's going to be the first portion of our discussion. And then we're going to kind of move forward to what that has given birth to and where we're going with it from there. I think it's just an amazing thing that these guys did. That it's, again, like franchising found them, it found me. My next week's guest after I had Allan on was, guess who? Dave Pazgan, because Allan filled me up with all this information about the things that he kind of conceived of, but Dave started running with the ball. And here we are today, 18 months later. We are the franchisors of ZorForum, which was born out of this conversation that I'm about to host with Allan and Dave. So fasten your seatbelt. It's a great story. And let me introduce first Allan Young, who today is the CEO of Frambridge Capital, former CEO and always the founder of Shelf Genie. Allan.
Yeah, thanks, Stan. I think you covered everything. I appreciate it.
All right. So
that was a very good introduction. Yeah, thanks for having me.
And Dave, say hello.
Hey, hi, everybody. Thanks for having me as well.
So what I'd like to do is just kind of recreate what we did in that podcast interview. And Allan, I'm going to start with you because that's where it all started for me. So you're a big guy in the world of peer groups, I believe YPO and maybe even EO. You're a big believer in the power of forums and networking and peer groups. So what was it about the idea that you created with Frank and with Dave and all the others, and you can self-identify who they are, that led you to doing yet another group on top of the ones that you were already involved with? What made it important to you enough to get yet another group going?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, we started out, I think all of us except for one in our group used iFranchise Group as the consultants to start franchising. So when we did that, iFranchise Group and probably a lot of the other consultants, we don't know what vendors to use. So they helped us and said, here's our recommended vendor for this. And so we all were using the same vendors, and we'd see each other at conferences. And I think where we bonded, one, probably at the bar most of the time. And two, we were drinking heavily because we're so frustrated with all of our vendors, as most people are. So we kind of bonded over that, and we started talking and just became good friends. And, a couple years later, Nick Friedman and I talked about this a couple times, that wouldn't it be great if we just all got together and shared best practices and things like that. And Stan, you mentioned, we weren't direct competitors in our models, but I think to a certain extent, depending upon what your franchise is and the range and the type of lifestyle that you're selling for franchising, we were competitors in franchise sales. Oftentimes I would get a candidate and Dave would have same one. And, but we also believe, all of us believe really strongly that we want candidates to find the right fit. If Shelf Genie wasn't it and one-on-one was better, that was great. But we decided to start meeting to share best practices, and we met once a quarter for 3 days, and we even had facilitators at different times. But the idea was to share best practices on all the things and all the challenges that you have in franchising, emerging or not. So as we started to do that, and you mentioned, a couple years later, there's only so many things you can talk about on these topics, like, a franchise conference, franchise sales, supporting franchisees, technology, vendors. I think probably we kind of joked about our most powerful thing that we had that we've never shared and probably never will is our blacklist of vendors, not the vendors that are good, the ones that you should never touch. And that, that does save you a lot. Like we missed a lot of landmines just by that bit of information, but we shared a lot of information. It was extremely helpful, as you mentioned, as we navigated our businesses. But a few years later, I joined YPO, Young Presidents Organization, and both EO and YPO have forum. And, it's the number one, if you survey YPOers, there's, I think 36,000 YPO CEOs from around the world that are in YPO. If they're surveyed, and what's the number one reason why they stay in YPO is forum. So I jumped into a local, I didn't know what forum was, but it started to look and feel a lot like what we had with our group. And the only difference was we went really deep. Business was a part of it, certainly, but personal and family, basically anything that you have going on in your life, the top 5 and the bottom 5%, the stuff that we all talk about when we meet, even with good friends, is usually not that top 5, bottom 5. It's the middle 20-30% that you share with just acquaintances, and then you go a little deeper with friends. But what's that stuff that you don't want to or can't share with your spouse because they don't get it in business, or it's a problem with your spouse or with your kids? It could be a medical issue or whatever. Personal things we all deal with. We don't have time for ourselves. And I'm a big believer, and we're a big believer in the fact that if you don't put your oxygen mask on first, if you don't take care of yourself, if you're not okay, if your family's not okay, then that's going to significantly bleed over into your business. That's true for anyone. So, we would dive deep into my chapter forum here in Atlanta with YPO. And it was a similar but extremely different experience from what I got out of it outside of business and with business. So we made the decision. I pitched it to our guys saying, here's this great YPO experience with forum. And there is as you guys have, there is a very well, 50, 60 years of YPO. They've developed this forum experience, and you get trained on it. So I hired a YPO forum facilitator to come to our group and train us. It's a full day training on how to do forum. And we learned all those things of how to do it and how to go deep and how to explore. One of the things that we never do is we don't should anybody, or we don't should all over people, because that's what we typically tend to do. Like, here's a problem, here's what you should do. We experience share. So what's really interesting when you experience share, the person that's got the issue gets a lot more out of it, and so does everyone else, because shared experiences is really where you learn. So we did that, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, Dave. I've kind of lost track, but it brought a lot of depth to our forum experience. And so we do all the things we did before. If we, Stan, you mentioned if we're selling our companies, or we want to bring in partners, or we want to expand, any of the bigger on the business stuff has been significant. But probably my biggest takeaway is the deep connection that I have with these guys, and anything that I want to talk about, it's like you said, Stan, completely confidential. Anything in our forum meetings is completely confidential. It never goes out of that room. And that gives a lot of safe space to talk about a lot of things, not just, hey, I'm selling my business, don't tell anybody, it's confidential, or it's a lot deeper than that. So
Dave, I've always proffered that some of the loneliest people in the world are emerging franchisors, to the point that Graham made in his opening remarks. They don't know what they don't know, and they don't know enough people to help them find others like them, that they can spare themselves the pain of a missed opportunity or a mistake that didn't have to get made. What can you tell us about the difference, Dave, between how it feels to do that in a room that are only emerging franchisors as point of entry, as compared to maybe peer groups that are more general in scope in terms of its membership?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of very specific issues in franchising that are pretty much unique to the industry. Things like franchise development and franchisee relationships and things along those lines. I went from running a pretty sizable company that was not a franchise prior to starting my franchise company. And I had this sort of vision in my mind that when we started franchising, that it would somehow be easier than managing a lot of employees, because these people all own their own businesses, and they're all smart people that have resources, and they're going to be reasonable and rational business people all the time. And I found that to not be true. And so it was a little bit of a wake-up call for me when I first started getting into franchising, and then you start to build and grow. And I thought, well, gee, I know a fair bit about leadership and management and business, but franchising was kind of its own whole own thing for sure. And a lot of that had to do with the, managing of franchise relationships and expectations and things along those lines. And so I think you're exactly right, Stan. When you are first dipping your toe in that water and you kind of look around the universe of franchising, and you start to go to IFA and you start to hear the acronyms and the catchphrases and the things that all the other people are talking about that you don't know anything about, it's kind of intimidating. And you sort of develop this really aggressive thirst for knowledge. Like, I want to know as much about this industry as I can, as quickly as I can. And there's a lot of ways to go about doing that, but learning from your peers is probably one of the most efficient. And so when Allan approached me and said, hey, I'm kind of putting this group together, I think we could learn a lot from each other. It took me like no time at all to be like, yeah, immediately, yes, let's do that. And let's, kind of start to learn from each other. And the first probably year or so of us getting together was mostly best practice sharing. And we had a lot of them, just a ton of stuff, all different facets of franchising, including development, supporting them, marketing on both the franchise development side as well as the consumer side. All of those different aspects of franchising were really hot topics for us. And kind of to Allan's point, we all use a lot of different vendors in franchising, and hey, I need somebody to do technology or build a website or whatever, PR or whatever it may be. And as we all know, there's no shortage of options in franchising. And so how do you pick? Like, how do you even evaluate who might be good and who might not be good, at least for your organization? And so being able to start to talk with these guys and get to know them and learn about their experiences, it was a complete game changer for me. And I think for all of us, really, because we were all really in that same pretty early stage of growth at the time. And then the other, I think, big part of it outside of franchising was a bunch of really great guys and smart people. Like, we just, learned a lot from each other just about business and leadership and other things that went beyond specifically just issues that face an emerging franchisor, but into, more leadership oriented, strategic planning. And then, fast forward 6 or 7 years later, hey, how do we engage investment bankers and private equity firms to start to realize, some of our value that we've created? How do we start to take some chips off the table and navigate that universe, which for many of us was the first time doing that too. And so, we covered a ton of ground over the years and learned just massive amounts from each other. It would have been really, really difficult to learn the volume of information that I learned really any other way, and have confidence in what I was learning and the information that I was getting to be valid and accurate.
So why don't we've made mention on the periphery here of this group. Why don't we tell the audience, because I don't think there's any better way to validate what we're doing today than to share with the audience today who the others are, because they're all people we pretty much all know, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. So most of them we're still in franchising in one form or another. A couple of the group members have moved out of franchising and are doing other things, but the group still, meets regularly. We have a meeting coming up, a retreat in Boulder coming up next month, actually. And so the other participants are Frank Milner, who's the CEO of Tutor Doctor, Justin Bredeman, who's the founder and CEO of Soccer Shots Franchising, Omar Solomon, who's one of the co-founders of College Hunks. We have, who am I missing? Allan, help me out here. Brian Mattingly, who at the time was running a company called Welcome Mat Services. He's still running Welcome Mat Services, but they've moved to be more of a technology provider versus a franchise at this point. And then Boris Katz-Nelson, who had raised some capital and purchased Speedpro Imaging, which is a large format printing franchise. And did I miss anybody? I think I got everybody. Yeah. So that's kind of who the group was. And at the time, like you said, we were all, kind of just getting started in franchising. And the really cool thing about it is, watching, I remember meeting everybody and kind of being impressed with everybody's background and where everybody got started, but everybody's business was still pretty small. We had 10 or 12 franchisees. We were, maybe doing $1 million, $2 million, $3 million of system-wide sales. And now you kind of look at that landscape of companies and, several of them are well above 100 million in system-wide sales and, continuing to grow aggressively. And so just being able to participate with people and leaders of that caliber, with the ability to grow businesses of that size and successfully and really well-renowned companies is kind of a really unique thing. And it's, for those of you that are new to franchising or just getting your toe in the water, you'll find, I think, that the franchise community in general is pretty good at sharing information, but having a format to do it in an organized way and consistently with people you get to know really well and trust is kind of taking that whole knowledge sharing to a whole nother level.
And I think that we need to acknowledge too that in our audience today, amongst those listening, we want to try to tweak your interests, both from the perspective of becoming members of ZorForum groups and benefiting from the same kind of magic that these guys collectively created for each other. We're also going to entertain conversations with franchise professionals, and I know there are more than a few of you out there with us today that may want to talk with us about the opportunity to put another feather in your quiver, if you will, and have an add-on service to things that you may provide to the franchise community today as a moderator or a franchisee, which we call moderators of the ZorForum. So we're talking to an audience of each of you today, and we're very happy to have each of you here. Allan, I'm going to ask you to go back and expound a little further on the point that I asked Dave to clarify about the difference between any peer group or a peer group exclusively to the benefit of emerging franchisors. How powerful is that to you?
Yeah, I think it's extremely powerful. Like I said before, I'm in two different forums, a YPO forum, which is amazing in and of itself, but it's so different because we come from different industries, CEOs from huge companies, 13, 15, 50, 100, $200 million or more. One of the guys in my forum is $1 billion company. So, and it's, you can learn from other, you can learn a lot from other CEOs because at the end of the day, every business is a business, and we all know that. But there's specific things to franchising, like Dave talked about, but extremely specific things to being an emerging franchisor. I mean, you're literally, just running around, trying to figure it out. It's desperate. It's lonely. Every day you're waking up going, am I going to make it? And I've got these franchisees who, Dave was talking about the difference in employees. If we could only figure out how to fire franchisees, things would be great. But we can't. And you want to bring in the right ones that you don't want to fire, but you make one mistake, and we do, on the wrong franchisee, it's difficult. So all those things when you're starting out, when you start out, if your first 10 franchisees, if most high percentage of them aren't good, that's a big problem that follows you around for a while. So all the different things that you can make huge misses on that can really sink the ship. I don't know what the percentage is exactly, but I think getting number of franchisors that get to 20 or more franchisees is a significantly small percentage. So you're literally like those little turtles that hatch out of on the beach, and they try to get to the ocean, and very few of them do. So I think it's a testament to our forum. I would say there's a very large correlation with the fact that not only did all of us make it, but all of us had some pretty significant success. And I think of, Justin Bredeman comes to mind. When he joined, he was kind of like the kid brother of our group. Not only was he young, but he had soccer shots. I think at that point it was a part-time business. People at the franchise fee was like $15,000, and it was kind of part-time business for most people, like a side gig even. And today, if you look at Soccer Shots, it's a massive organization. They've just grown, and it's not a part-time business. It's an executive model. And I know he would say, and he said, and all of us would say, is the things he learned from our group, everyone collectively in our group, is, the reason for success. If we took out our forum, I think Dave would agree, a lot of us wouldn't have made it, or we wouldn't have made it as far as we did.
That's pretty powerful. That's a pretty powerful statement, actually. And I appreciate you sharing that with us. I want to encourage anyone in the audience that may have questions to post them. And at the end, we're going to try to leave a little time to address those. But if you leave those for us in the chat, we'll be able to come back and circle around on that. Dave, I've got one for you that I want to just put the elephant on the table, because I think that there is probably nobody busier than emerging franchisors. Nobody more scattered in how many balls they're juggling than emerging franchisors. What's the challenge that one may face in getting people to join and then commit to the time of a group on a monthly basis. Here comes a smile from Allan. He's heard that stuff before.
Yeah.
Let's
Well,
talk about that, and then let's talk about that, and then let's also talk about what could a emerging franchisor be doing with 3 hours of his time a month that might be more valuable than what's going to come out of that group.
Yeah, well, first off, the members of ZorForum have a big advantage over kind of our original group in that there's third-party professional moderation happening. So
Right.
you've got the Stans, and you've got Francis, and you've got Jerry and Graham and Eric moderating these groups and sort of managing the logistics and things along those lines. And that takes a ton of pressure off of the group members to not have to be, managing those things and putting, time into it. And our group, quite honestly, has struggled off and on over the years because we've been together for almost 9 years now. It's going on 9 this year. And so, we've had kind of our ups and downs, I think, like any group would. But most of the time when we've had challenges, it's been around, who's responsible for moderating, who's responsible for logistics and timing and sending out the invites and collecting the monthly updates and all of those kinds of things. And it's a challenge, right? Because everybody's busy. Everybody's got stuff going on. It's not usually your top priority, or there's, urgent things that pop up and you just kind of feel like you need to deal with them. And so we've definitely been challenged by that over the years. And so having someone who's responsible that's not a group member taking care of all that is a huge advantage in this particular structure over, the way that we've done it historically. And we're actually, our next upcoming meeting is we've hired a professional facilitator to do the whole meeting for us. We're doing it in person over 3 days because we felt like we needed that reset. And, the last couple of meetings that we've had just haven't been that well organized for the very reasons you just mentioned, Stan. So, we're kind of like, well, who's responsible for this? Who's responsible for that? Who's making the dinner reservation? Who's, whatever. So, that's been a big challenge. That being said, we always, every time we kind of have one of these like heart-to-heart talks about commitment and, responsiveness to each other, around the horn, we always say the same exact things, which is we definitely want to keep the group together. We definitely agree that it needs to be better organized. We need a plan to, kind of have more structure around the way that we meet and the timing and things along those lines. And the good news is that ZorForum members just don't have to worry about any of that. That just gets handled. And that takes a ton of the pressure off. Outside of that, just protect the time. Like it's any other meeting, right? If you guys have board meetings that your, investors or board members expect you to attend, you don't call an hour before the board meeting and say, hey, I got something that came up, I can't come. Like you go to the board meeting, right? It's the priority. And so I think you have to kind of think of it in the same terms and protect the time and make sure that, everyone does it equally in your group. And that's really your moderator's responsibility. But I think, being committed to it is the only way it works. Like you can't be half in or half out or show up sometimes and not other times. If you want to try to recreate the magic that our first group has over the last 8 years, you got to be like super committed to it and really stick to the program. And it won't always be easy because there's always stuff that comes up and maybe feels more important. But I'm telling you, like if you try it for a couple of meetings and it's not really clicking yet, just keep sticking to it. Like if you're 6 or 8 months in and it's not jiving for you, that's a different story. But if you come to a meeting or two and you're like, well, that's cool, I'm kind of learning some stuff, but I'm not sure yet, you got to stick with it longer than that. Like it took us a good year, I think, to get really gelled together and start to feel really comfortable with one another. And that was about the time I think Allan took the lead on this to, kind of change our meeting structure away from being mostly best practice sharing to more of a forum style type of approach where we were doing more explorations and, monthly updates and things like that. And honestly, that's when the group really took off. And so ZorForum was designed to be that way out of the box. Now there's always going to be a little bit of getting to know each other and familiarity that needs to happen. That's natural, right? But a year in or a year and a half in, you'll notice that the group is like really solid, getting to know each other, getting to trust each other. And if you're occasionally in or out, that will never happen.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, the commitment thing, form doesn't work unless you're committed, to Dave's point. And yeah, I've never missed a meeting in the entire time. Dave, I don't think you've missed a meeting.
I've never missed one either. Yeah.
Most of us have not. And if someone does, it's a major, major life event, like just something came up. But outside of that, there's very few things that I'm going to put as a higher priority. Even a board meeting, I moved a board meeting. I'm like, sorry, I've got my form, we can't do it. I'll do, it's 2 or 3 days. And in this case, we're committing to 3 days, traveling in 3 days, every single time. We've been doing that and we don't miss it. Dave and I've never missed it. There's a lot of them haven't, and we might have 1 or 2 folks have missed one for a life event. But 3 hours once a month, which is also the cadence of a YPO local forum. You meet 3 or 4 hours a month, and again, with those, you don't miss them. And if anything comes up, it's just not a priority, because what you're getting out of it, I think it's really recognizing the actual value you get out of it. And that's hard to do in the beginning, because you don't know what you don't know. Like what value am I getting out of this? Well, none when you begin, but you'll get so much out of this from not only learning, but also, to Dave's point, what you learn along the way. And the deep connections that you have with people. I can't even explain how deep of a connection that I have with my forum mates. It's impossible. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting in YPO, I didn't know too much about forum. I joined one. It was starting to work for me. I went to YPO events, and I met YPOers that have been in forums with the same people for 20 to 30 years. And they would talk about that. Like Dave's family is part of my family. Our families, we've done things with our spouses, but our families, we're all part of it. We're part of each other's lives. And that's just such a deep connection. And when you have that, you can learn so much more and go so much deeper, but it doesn't happen overnight, to Dave's point.
So I want to ask one more thing in comparison to EO or YPO. And that is, and first, let me just remind the audience, we are not meeting in person. We're meeting virtually on these 3-hour monthly meetings. So you have no barriers or constraints for geography in terms of joining a group. And it should be a lot easier to make that commitment, because it is virtual. There's no travel or expensive travel that's involved. I want to ask you, Allan, as we close in on the next segment of the program, I want to ask you about the cost difference. So I've always been told that YPO and EO are big financial commitments, and we in franchising know that we are not Wall Street, but Main Street. And so emerging franchisors that are invited to become part of ZorForum groups have a monthly commitment of a big whopping $495 per month, which, if that becomes a point of a barrier to entry, they probably shouldn't be franchising anyway. But what kind of number is there around YPO or EO for a monthly commitment as compared to our $495?
Yeah, YPO, depending on the chapter, in $8,000 or $9,000 a year, and then plus expenses. So when we travel, like Dave and I, that's what we spend on drinks when we get there, or a plane ticket. So it's $400 a month. Wow, and a facilitator. So for example, we bring in a facilitator every year or two to help us not only moderate but kind of reset. It's good to have someone come from the outside that's experienced, and there's lots of them out there. They're called certified form fundamental trainers, and they come in and facilitate retreats as part of what they do. We're paying $10,000 for 2 days for that person to come in. So
right there,
yeah, right there. Plus travel and everything else. But I would spend double, triple, quadruple that, to get to that level. I've used CEO coaches for years, and I coach now some, and I would pay my coaches $5,000 a month for 3 hours is what the typical rate is for a CEO coach, which I find value in it. I mean, $60,000 a year, if they help you make 1 or 2 good moves, you get a return on the investment. YPO is like, paying $10,000 a year, or with our group, the amount of money you're spending, $400, that's a no-brainer. And by the way, I came up with the idea. I do not get paid for this. I'm not saying I shouldn't get paid for it, Stan, but I do not get paid anything for my idea. And so I have no skin in the game, whether you guys sign up, become franchisees. I'm just a huge fan, and what you guys have going on is amazing.
Well, I thank you for helping to conceive this idea. And for my part, my hope is as many things as I've done in franchising over the years, that this will be something I can put legacy next to and feel like we've done well by doing good. Graham, I know you've got a question that you wanted to throw here, and I'll give you 3.5 minutes for that because we do need to move to keep on time to the manifesto. So Allan and Dave, I'm going to ask you to stick around. Don't go anywhere. Stay with us. You've done a phenomenal job of helping to set the table for what this is all about. And Graham, go ahead and hit that question before we give it to Eric to let everyone see our manifesto.
Thank you, Stan. I just wanted to ask one question of Dave and Allan, because I think this quick story is a perfect reflection of the power that's created when you have sustainable groups and meaningful relationships with the group members in these forum style communities that we're building. Allan, you know, when you were getting to the point where you were going to sell Shelf Genie, you had an accident, if I'm not mistaken, and Dave was super helpful in pulling things together to make sure a deal was done at a time where you may not have been necessarily available in some critical moments there. So if you don't mind sharing that, I think that does a good job of showing everybody here the degree to which you can rely upon your forum mates to help each other, in times of crisis.
Yeah, I think it was, we were getting ready to close on our deal to sell to Neighborly, and probably a week before that, maybe just a few days before that, I was paragliding and had an accident, fell about 40 feet, broke my back, and was paralyzed. So, Dave and my other forum mates were very helpful in helping me out. I DocuSigned the deal in my hospital bed a few days later, paralyzed, and DocuSigned it. But that's about all I could do. Couldn't do a lot else. I didn't have my cell phone, couldn't make calls, things like that. So between Dave and the rest of the folks in the group, extremely helpful in getting that thing done.
Excellent. That's amazing. Another powerful bond that probably couldn't have been there any other way. So thank you for asking, Graham, and Dave and Allan, thank you for being there for each other. So what we'd like to do now is a little bit backstage. It's a little bit quiet. We've not shared this with anyone yet, so we're rolling it out for the first time here. But we've put a fair amount of time into our marching orders, our manifesto, what drives us, what makes us wake up every day wanting to do this among the many other things that all of us are busy doing in our lives. The production on this is not final or finished, so I'm going to ask you to really zone in and listen because everything about what we live and breathe right now is all about this manifesto. On the other side of that, we've got John Francis and Jerry Henley and Eric Mayes, who are our first 3 moderators with us. This call was scheduled for an hour, and it's going to end on time. But for any of you that wish to hang with us for another 30 minutes, if we've wet your whistle at all, you're invited to do so, and we're more than happy to stay and talk some more about this opportunity. So with that, I'm going to ask Eric to let it roll. Well, that audio's not with it.
More than just.
There you go.
Try that again. We are ZorForum, a collective of leaders who believe that franchising is more than just a revolutionary business model. It's also a powerful force for good, and we Zors are its champions. We believe that being a Zor is more than just a profession. It's a noble calling, daring us to become more than purveyors of goods and services, daring us to become creators of growth opportunities, realize dreams and successful futures. We are all leaders on the Zor path. However, This path is not for the faint of heart, not for the selfish nor the greedy, not for the willfully ignorant nor the closed-minded. This path is for the courageous, for the selfless and the generous, for the wise and the growth-minded. For it is the givers, not the takers, who will reap the true rewards this path has to offer. As Zors, creating opportunities for others and cultivating the next generation of leaders fills us with passion and purpose. So we measure our success not by the mere amount of money we make, but by the sheer amount of success stories we hope to create. At ZorForum, we purposefully choose to navigate the Zor path together. We convene monthly to share our hard-earned wisdom and unique perspectives to help fellow Zors overcome adversity and achieve success, while simultaneously they do the same for us. That means together, we Zor to build better businesses. Together, we Zor to become better leaders. Together, we Zor to create a better future. We are ZorForum. We Zor together to soar together.
Allan, I hope that, let's let that wind down there, Garth. Allan, I hope we do you proud with that. Any comments on that as the conceiver of it all? Allan, did we lose you?
No, sorry, I had on mute. Yeah, I think it's great to see that and see not only what we did, but to Dave's point, the improvements that you guys have made on that across the board, all the things that we learned from or couldn't do because, you know, there's just 7 of us. It's not professionalized, and I think you guys have done a great job doing it.
Thank you so much. And I mean, thank you so much for those remarks, but thank you so much too for having the idea in the first place and giving us this path to run on. I'm going to ask John Francis and Jerry Henley if they'd like to say a quick hello before we all have to say goodbye. And again, I invite you to know that we'll be here for 30 more minutes if you choose to stay with us. In either case, the goal we would like to have for today's call is to see each of you that has stayed with us through the program to come visit us at zorforum.com and follow the appropriate tracks, whether you're interested in learning more about moderation and becoming a franchisee, or more importantly, becoming a member of a group. You'll find tabs and navigation to get you to either course of direction that you're seeking. And we certainly hope that we'll get the opportunity to talk further with you along the way. Why don't I start with you, Johnny Franchise? Say hello.
Hey, thank you, Stan. I appreciate it. And thanks, Allan and Dave, for the comments and background on ZorForum and how things got started. I'm a big fan of peer groups for business owners. I was a member of a group here in Minneapolis, a brand called Inner Circle, which is actually back in the 80s. You can believe that, back in the old days when I was a young man. And I actually helped that brand franchise their concept, and we sold it in 2009. I stayed on as a member in my group for more than 20 years, Allan, kind of like you were saying. Some of these things really work, and you stick with the group because it's so much fun and there's so much value, and the relationships that are developed were fantastic. So that group kind of ran its course for me. My career changed, and different things caused me to drop that group about 5 or 6 years ago. So I've been kind of waiting for ZorForum. I've seen it in different iterations, and I've seen other groups trying to attempt similar structure. But when I saw this come alive with Dave and then Stan and Graham, I thought, well, this is great. I've been waiting for this. So I was eager to get involved and participate as a first franchisee. I started my groups last fall in October is when things really started. I've got 2 groups running now, and we're having a great time, good meetings, good outcomes. I don't think any of my members are here today, but I do suspect that you'll hear from them sooner or later as they show up. And I know I think all of them will be at IFA next week or whenever next weekend. So anyway, I'm glad to be part of it. Thanks for putting this webinar on today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us, John. And I mean both today and as ZorForum #1. I'd like to introduce you to Jerry Henley, who came behind John and had the audacious goal of starting this and a couple of other pieces and parts of his franchise consultancy all at the same time. And as Jerry's getting ready to get Group 1 launched, Jerry, why don't you give us a couple of your thoughts and reflections on your participation with us at ZorForum?
Well, this is a great thing, and it's certainly hard for me to follow the people that have come before me. I don't mind being number 2 behind Johnny Franchise. That's okay. John was actually my original mentor when franchising found me. But listen, the only thing that I would add is that over the years, we all get together every year, every IFA, other conferences, and all talk about the same struggles that go on with emerging franchisees. And, my passion became, as I've gotten a little bit older, to be franchising done right, as Johnny Franchise says. And I say, and I'm just thrilled to be part of this, that we can actually make a difference here. And I think that's why a lot of us are in there, is franchise has given us a lot, and it's a way to give back. But I mean, it's just with my consultants group, my coaching group, we focus on emerging brands, and hopefully I get them right when after they've done iFranchise or somebody. I'm calling myself the what now guy, or I get involved when they've got over the tips of their skis and we got to fix a bunch of stuff. So I much prefer getting them started out right and getting them on the right track as fast as possible. So if they are over the tips of their skis, these groups will help you get out of that effectively. So that's my big takeaways there, Stan. I don't have anything else.
Appreciate you all day long. Allan, any closing thoughts that you and Dave want to share with the group?
No, I mean, I'm excited for you guys. It's great to watch how far you've come over the last 18 months, and it's exciting. I'm very excited to see where you guys take it, and I know it's going to go great. And if you're looking to be, if you're emerging franchisor and you're looking to add some significant growth to your company, and also just missing all the obstacles, learning from the mistakes that other people are making, and also the successes to follow those. 3 hours a month, $400 is
$495.
Yeah, $495. And I, my only comment is, you guys
You
are
need that $95, man.
Yeah, you guys are charging way too little. So if I was involved, it would be a lot more, and you should. That's literally so if you guys can get it at $495 and lock that rate in, but the value you're going to get is for your time, and that amount of money is going to be incredible. There's nothing more you can do with your money and your time to get more out of it than joining a forum.
Thank you, Allan. Dave?
Yeah, I would just say thanks. I owe Allan a debt of gratitude forever and ever, because he was the one who kind of put it all together in the first place and changed the game for me entirely. And so I don't think I would have gotten nearly as much out of franchising, or as much enjoyment, or had sort of as much success, I guess, as I've had in franchising over the years, without the benefit of the group. And that was Allan's brainchild, and it's been a game changer for sure. So thank you, Allan.
And my other partners in this venture, Eric Mayers and Graham Chapman, any closing thoughts?
Eric, you go first, man. We've sucked up.
Hey, you haven't heard from me all session. Man, I'm completely excited to be a part of ZorForum. I feel like, as a former emerging franchisor and a current franchisor with ZorForum, this was the type of group that I was missing. I was a part of a unit for about 3 years, and we hit one of those landmines that you guys talk about as a blind spot. And, those blind spots can be deadly to a franchise. So, I highly recommend, if you haven't, become a part of a peer group. It's essential to your business success for sure. So thanks again for coming.
Thank you, Eric. And it's now 1:57. I promised that we would end on time. I always like to under promise and over deliver. So unless and until there are those of you who wish to hang with us, we're going to be the very last to disconnect from this call. But for those of you who came to a 1-hour meeting, you're free to leave us at any time as long as your next stop is www.zorforum.com. And we hope to hear from you. And we thank you for sharing an hour of your day with us, especially this busy week in front of IFA. Thank you, everybody. And
Thanks, everyone.
we're all here for the next 30 minutes. If any of you want to stay on with us, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, thank you.